welcome to Big Apple School Podcast. This is Mike.
And this is Vladimir.
And today we're talking about my favorite topic, the power of video games.
Wow. That's not my favorite topic, but still, I think I will learn something new.
You know what, Vladimir? You don't strike me as a gamer. You see, you see, a gamer knows a gamer when he sees one, right? So this was, I'd say you're not a gamer, so you're a newbie, but we will call a noob. A noob. And we'll go easy on you today.
Okay. So what is the video gaming industry worth worldwide?
Well, okay, so let's dive into some statistics here, okay? So in 2014, guess how much this industry was worth? So 6 years ago, right? And we're not talking about millions here. We're talking about billions.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So you guess a rough estimate, and I'll tell you the real answer.
Okay, I'll try. Maybe 40 or 50 billion?
Try doubling that.
Wow.
Try doubling that. 81.5 billion. 2014. Yeah. Now, compare this to the movie industry. The global film industry around the world, so including TV, yes, was worth less than half that. Yeah, it was worth something like 35, 36 at the time. So by then, we could see in 2014, the video gaming industry was by far the most profitable entertainment industry in the world, far surpassing music and movies. Yeah. So in 2018, this is an interesting part. Think about how much it had grown. Have a guess.
Maybe it doubled or something like that?
Almost. It actually was worth 134 billion. So you can see the incredible exponential growth by then. And the year later, 2019, last year, it was worth 152 billion. So you can see it just grows and grows and grows. Right. It's a real growth industry, right? Because it's just everybody loves it. Everybody is in tune with it, right? I mean, even the youngest to the oldest, they just love this thing, right?
Okay. So why do you think it's growing so rapidly? Is it because it's so popular with all the people?
Yeah, I just think that it's such a powerful force in the world today because it just caters to so many kinds of people now, right? Now, not back then, but now. Yeah. So as I said before, young, old, rich, poor, educated, uneducated, male, female, story lovers to even thrill seekers. You know, especially now that everybody has a supercomputer in their pockets called a mobile phone, these things become, the video gaming has become more accessible to everyone of every type, right?
Okay.
So there's always something on offer for anyone and everyone in the world of video games. Yeah. If you don't like one game, there's something else that's gonna, it's gonna stir you crazy, right? And this is really in stark contrast to the 80s and the 90s, the sort of the beginnings of video gaming history. Back in those days, it only really catered to one kind of people. Really, two kinds of people. Kids, right, who were growing up, and also the sort of nerdy young adults, right? Yeah. So these were the only two types that really loved video gaming at the time. And the world saw gamers that way. You're either a little kid. If you love video games, you're either a kid or you're some nerdy guy, who basically didn't have a life, right? And that was sort of the negative stereotype.
Okay.
That was sort of endowed upon gamers at that time. Totally different story in 2020. Totally different. Yeah.
Yes, I see. But can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why do you think people like playing video games? I'm trying to understand the reason why they do this, and it's quite difficult to explain.
This is believe it or not, this is a sort of a question in what they call video game design, right? And there are these professionals called video game designers, right?
Okay.
And they create, their job is to create systems that you play. Video games are like a system, like a systematic way of doing things that hook you psychologically. They're designed to be addictive, right? And there's a great deal of psychology and art that goes into this.
Key point, yeah.
Yeah, and there have been many articles on why, from a psychological stance, because video gaming has become such a powerful force in modern life that psychologists and psychiatrists have to deal with this problem. Yeah, when it becomes a problem. in people's lives, right? So it's sort of closely tied in with sort of like behaviors of addiction, right? Some say it's sort of it's just dopamine hits and sort of serotonin, and there's like neurochemistry involved in all this, right? But ultimately, it's just fun. It's just fun, right? It's fun, but at the same time, many emotions come into it, right? The emotion of competition, jealousy, anger, right? Depression, hopelessness. They're all kind of, it's a real emotion fest, right? That helps people feel these things. I think the word is feel. Feel things they can't feel in their mundane, normal, routine, ordinary lives, that it becomes addictive, right? And this is not, just localized just onto video games, right? I mean, anything from music to movies to, something like even pro wrestling or even, sports, they all allow people to feel things, right? Well, video games allow people to feel, but they also allow people to ponder, think, strategize, right? To reflect upon life sometimes, because, I think video games have become more than just gaming. I think they've become some sort of art.
And actually, can video games be considered art?
Absolutely.
Do you really think so?
Yeah, I actually think it's probably the greatest form of art in the 21st century. I actually think so. When I was a kid, there was sort of a wide belief among the art community that filmmaking was perhaps the greatest form of art, because it combined everything from cinematography, from the visual down to the audio, down to performance, right, of the actors.
Of course.
It combined it all together, and thus film directors, the good ones, tended to be much older than artists in other art forms. Because they needed to be the kind of people, like a maestro, they needed to be the kind of people that could coordinate all these different disciplines, and create a single, well-flowing piece of art. And that took a long time to develop, right? So it's sort of filmmaking, when I was a kid in the 80s and the 90s, was considered like the most pinnacle of art, right?
Yeah.
I think in the 21st century, that's a different case. I think video gaming does that, combine all those disciplines together, plus it combines game design, right? A well-designed game makes people want to keep playing it, right? And then of course it encompasses the programming, right? Programming and language and all that. So it's actually more a complicated piece of art. And it's no wonder that, really, really well-selling games around the world have a lot more money invested in the creation of it, and more time goes into creating it than movies, right?
Yeah.
Because you have hundreds, if not thousands of people working on a single project, right?
That's true.
So what used to be the big blockbusters of back in the day, the budget of that is sort of, the video game budgets today not only rival it, but surpass it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to make these things now. If it is a AAA, what we call a AAA, which means the top of the range.
I see.
Yes, top of the range kind of games.
So as far as I understand, video games combine different kinds of art, like music, movies, design, maybe, right? So that's why we can say that definitely it's art nowadays.
Well, it also affects other forms of art too. I mean, like the new series, The Mandalorian, right? The Star Wars series. That's sort of been getting momentum around the world. And a lot of Russians here have seen it and they loved it. This series, do you know how this series was filmed?
Actually, no.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So they have 300, they put the actors, so you want to, let's say you have a scene, right? It's about, and it's futuristic, right? So it's space fantasy. So you're supposed to have like a futuristic bar, right? In some off-world planet full of aliens, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Well, what they did, traditionally what you would have is guys dress up in, alien costumes, sitting around, and they have to actually design a bar and all these kind of things, right? They didn't have to do that with this film, with this series.
So it's different.
What they did was they put actors in costume in a gigantic 360 room full of, I think, 6K or 8K. So, high, ultra high resolution screens, right? 360 degrees, yes.
Okay.
And they created the backdrop, the background, using what we call video game technology. So they take an engine what they call video game engine that's used to create shooters, what they call Unreal Engine.
Right. Okay.
Right. Very. It's a very reputed. It's a very. It's a game engine that has been around for a very long time. And it's in its fourth edition now, and they use the Unreal 4 engine to generate the background. Right. So you no longer need to transport your cast and crew. If you're shooting a desert, you don't need to transport into the desert.
Yes,
you just need to. The computing guy just has to use the game engine to create a desert because it looks so photorealistic. These engines look so good, so real, that you can get away with it now. Yeah. So they're using high definition screens to do that. That's one way that video game is making a huge contribution to the other arts.
Yes, of course. That's interesting, and now it makes sense for me. Okay, and but maybe we can talk about. Or we can look at video games from a different perspective. And I know that lots of people say and claim that video games contain a lot of violence. So what do you think about this issue?
Yeah, well, here's the thing about that. Look, this is something that came around. This was a big issue, even in the 90s, when the video games really started taking off, right, in its first steps. And the first game that really caused a stir was a game called Mortal Kombat, which was a fighting game. It was like Street Fighter,
popular,
but it was very popular. And it was a hit amongst kids, right? Who spent their $1 coin, $2 coins to play these things, right? The problem is it had a lot of violence. Even today, when you look at it, it has a lot of violence. I mean, it had, and the biggest thing was, one character ripping out another guy's head and the spine coming out, or ripping out a guy's heart, or putting him, like making him fall down like a pit full of knives, right, and blades, right, and being skewered by it. And this made parents around the world and the politicians around the world, real apeshit. They went crazy. Right? And they started saying video games are going to start ruining our kids. They're going to turn them into psychopaths and murderers. Right. Now, that was strike one. Okay. The big strike came, the second strike was the biggest. It was the most damaging thing. Have you heard of the Columbine massacre?
No, I think. Or maybe.
Yeah, Columbine High massacre. So what happened?
Sounds familiar.
It's very familiar because it was America's first real school shooting.
Now I remember. Yes.
So these two high school students, they were avid players of a game called Doom. Doom was one of the representative games. Even today, it's still very popular all around the world. And, it was the first kind of video game that allowed you to, from a first-person perspective, hold a gun and shoot other living creatures, right? So, and these guys were avid players of that game. Well, they came in with shotguns and automatic hand rifles and whatnot, and handguns, and then they came in, they just, killed a whole bunch of kids, right? And it was revealed that they were into, movies like The Matrix. You could see that they had a lot of influence from The Matrix. The way they dressed came to the school, right? And, and they were avid video game players. And there was strike two. And basically, the world sort of started condemning video games and started putting ratings on it, right? So that, certain kids can play certain games, and if you're too young, you couldn't play certain games, and if you're old enough, you could play certain games, and it totally didn't work. It totally did not work because no kid really adhered. The parents didn't know what video gaming was. They didn't even know really how to buy certain video games, right? So it never worked. The rating system never worked, and today it's almost universally ignored. Yeah, nobody really cares, these things. But interestingly enough, as a lover of video games, we always stood on the side that video games do not cause psychological tendencies for violence. That was always our stance, right? Because we could see that movies were doing just as good job, if not better, right? I mean, those movies from the 90s were really
so
violent.
Realistic.
Yeah, I mean, they were doing a better job. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, I dated a psychologist, and we went into this topic, and she told me, she looked at, and I said, video games just don't cause violence. It's not true. She turned around, looked at me, and just, shook her head and went, it's not what the research says.
So she was sure they did. Yeah.
Well, from the world of psychology and psychiatry, they've done research of this, right? So they've took test groups and whatnot and did a large scale, large-scale research on this. Okay. And every research kind of shows that video games and pornography tend to create, tendency for violence, right? Violent behavior and violent thought, at least in young adolescents, right? So it's sort of been proven in their world, that these things have a profound psychological damaging effect.
In the world of psychology.
In the world of psychology and psychiatry, right?
Okay.
But the problem is, they are never going to win. I think they're never going to win. They're never going to convince the world. Do you know why?
True, yeah.
Do you know why?
No.
$152 billion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
They're fighting with the one force that they cannot argue against, which is money.
Big money, yeah.
This thing is grown to the point where nobody can control it, really. Interesting enough, there was one nation that tried to control it, and I'm not sure how they're doing well with that, but we'll talk about that at a later point.
Oh, okay, because it's interesting, And, so we've been talking about psychology and psychiatry, and my next question is, do you think video games have the power to affect human life and human relationships?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've seen examples of that plenty of times throughout my lifetime, right? I mean, let's start with the good.
Okay.
Right? Let's start with the good. I mean, I've known people who've been through depression, right? And, a lot of video games these days have stories. And some of these stories are written by, obviously professional writers who know their craft, right? And so they play story-driven games, and they're just like movies that you play, essentially. A lot of people don't understand that. Non-game, like my girlfriend does not understand this. I told her it's art, and the stories in it are just as good as the movies, if not better, right? Yeah. She doesn't believe that. She really doesn't. But they are. They are really that good. They're top-notch writing, some of these, right? And as some people who are depressed play these games, they find hope. And I would say the one that has been representatively great in that is a game called The Last of Us, right? It's a post-apocalyptic story. And it's sort of a story about a love between a father who lost his daughter and a girl who's lost in life, right? Sort of coming together to create hope for the future, for themselves, right? So these things have a profound effect in people's psychology.
Sounds interesting.
In a positive way. Right, in a positive way. And I've also seen people who have mental conditions, downright mental conditions that wouldn't allow them to live normal social lives, right? So guys who have, it's like a social anxiety disorders, right? And they find friends online. They find friends playing games. They find people that they can talk to with the power of the internet. Now you don't just text, you talk to them.
Right, of course.
Yeah, and I've seen people who have these online friends that are very supportive of each other, right? So, yes, they've done the Corona whole thing before us, right? They've done the whole online, social distancing, all that stuff way before us, right?
Of course. Yeah,
so I've seen some good friendships form from that. Yeah, I myself don't communicate with other gamers, right? I don't, because I tend to be a little bit of a lone wolf. Yeah, even on the online space, right? So, I personally don't, but I've seen people who have, right?
Yeah, sure.
Now we can get into the bad stuff.
Okay.
Right? We can get into the bad stuff, okay? So there is this subculture. I'll give you one example in Japan. And there's about 1 million of them in Japan, right? And other countries around the world too, right? Not just in Japan,
What's
right?
That?
They're called the hikikomori, right? Ooh, and these are guys, young men usually, mostly, in their 20s and 30s, who trap themselves in the home 24/7 and do nothing but play video games and watch anime.
That's crazy.
And they have absolutely no social lives, no ambitions. They live off government money or their parents, right? And it basically is a modern day recluse, or what you call a hermit, right? And part of the thing that keeps them going in this little box they created there for themselves is basically video games. They're video games, right? Because all of them are pretty much all avid video gamers or anime lovers, right? So, I mean, it can get to that. It allows people who are already inclined to be reclusive a tool to become even more reclusive, right?
It's dangerous.
It's like giving somebody who's violent a gun, right?
Yes.
It's not a good idea, right?
Of course.
But the difference is that guns are regulated. Video games are not really as regulated as much, right? So it can create some really bad situations, right? You can actually go the other way. Yeah, sure, they lose more hope the more they play games, right? And the other thing is, I suppose, many gamers around the world have lost girlfriends and boyfriends over this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was talking about this. I was at the dart show the weekend.
Yeah, because
a couple of weeks ago.
Because they're isolated. Yes, they like in their own shells.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was with a guy who's an American, and he's got a girlfriend who's Russian. I was with my girlfriend also, and four of us were smoking hookah in the room, right? And we the American guy and I started talking about video games. We're both gamers. We're both talking about this we started talking about it for like 10 minutes. Our girlfriends started rolling their eyes and going, oh my God, they're talking about video games. And they were talking about how much they hate us playing video games.
Here we go again.
Now, if we were not half decent people, I could tell if we were not half decent people, they would leave us. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Now it will never get to that point with us, but because we're common sense people. But there are people who don't have much common sense, right? And they play these things while neglecting their girlfriends and boyfriends to the point where...
Which is a problem.
You just leave. Yeah. You have no choice. It's like dealing with, I guess, alcoholics or gamblers, right? It's the same kind of addictive behavior, right? So it can be very, very, very damaging to human relationships.
Yeah, it's a problem, right? You're right. Okay, and so Mike, you've been here for a year. I mean, you've been in Russia, right, for a year. So what's your experience with the video gaming culture here in Russia?
It's a very vibrant, very vibrant environment for video gaming. And I was wondering why that was, and I think I know the perfect reason for it here, at least here in Siberia.
So what's that?
Your weather. Your weather.
Really?
Your weather. When it comes to the winters here, I mean, it gets cold here 8 months of the year, right?
Yeah, of course.
So outdoor activity becomes more challenging and expensive, right? Well, if you go to the video gaming stores here, they're pretty big, they're sizable, right? They're doing good business, you can tell, right? So a lot of Russians, when it comes to the winters and whatnot, or even the cold springs or the autumn, they want to sit at home. There's a lot of indoor culture here. And when they're indoors, you got to do something, right? And you can't invite friends all the time. So people like to fire up their gaming machines. They like to play video games. They like to read anime. They like to read books. There's a lot of that, and video gaming is kind of like an established indoor culture here.
Okay.
So
I agree.
I can tell that it's very, very profitable here in Russia, and being profitable means there are a lot of people who are fans of video games. And have it as a routine. And thus, I can see the same kinds of problems that could develop here when it comes to video gaming. It affecting human life and relationships.
Sure.
I don't think Russia is exempt from that at all. So I don't know how you feel about it. I don't know how you feel about the current culture of video gaming and gamers in Russia. I mean, is it a societal? Has it reached the point of being a society's problem or a societal problem or?
Well, I don't think that it's a problem, really. Of course, I agree with some points that in terms of maybe violence, it can be dangerous not for all gamers, but for children or like adolescents who's, how to say, maybe who wants to, or who don't have much life experience, and that's why they try to copy some patterns of behavior from video games. But in general, I think, of course, it's quite okay, and lots of people do this. They have positive experience mostly.
What's the history with that? Have there been any major shootings or stabbings or any sort of violent behavior affecting society in Russia?
As far as I know, fortunately, we haven't had such cases.
Right, and
which is good.
Which is good. I mean, 144 million people, right? I mean, there must be an incredible size of video gamers here, a number of them. Yet, so maybe psychologists and psychiatrists should do research on this, right? Why is it that in Russia it's not a problem?
I think it's a good topic for research.
What about reclusiveness? The hermit, the hikikomori culture we talked about before.
Well, it may be a problem because I think that anyway, teenagers, they share the same characteristics. They share maybe the same behavior, and that's why they can stay at home all the time, just playing computer games. from my experience, I can tell you, I had one student, but it was maybe around 5 or 7 years ago, and he was a gamer, and just he did really badly at school at university because he played all the time, and of course it was not good for him, and it caused some just negative things maybe in terms of his relationships with other students, fellow students, because he was quiet, he didn't want to communicate much, and also he had some problems with his school, I mean, in terms of academic performance. So
it did affect his life and relationships, no matter what. Right. So there are those kind of guys.
Yeah, for example, but when we started talking about video gaming and computer games, he was just, wow, I know everything about this topic. Let me tell you, let me share my experience with you. And it was, in this case, it was good for him.
It was good. So he, later on in life, he would have found a circle of friends who think on the same kind of...
I think so, anyway.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, I mean, I've seen some Russians here who learned a lot of English by playing video games.
And that's an interesting point. And so do you think that video games can be a good tool when you learn English?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe other...
certain kind of games. Like, for example, certain role-playing games are so story-rich. Like, the amount of text that's in them rivals I would say, a novel. Yeah, a small novel at least, right? And I told this to one of the Russian girls the other week, and she didn't believe it. She wasn't buying any of that. But she doesn't know the world like I do, right? So, yeah, I mean, some of these really have a lot of text to read, a lot of listening, a lot of, like I said, it has become a storytelling art, right? Form of art, right?
So video games can teach you English,
right? Absolutely.
Okay, that's good. Okay. And, well, I have one more question. So what countries dominate the video gaming world as an industry? Because you mentioned some countries, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are some countries that are very prominent in this. I suppose when it comes to the profits, so where a lot of those $152 billion come from, right? We talked about. Obviously, this is in order, So China, USA, Japan, South Korea, and Germany. These are the top 5. Yeah, this is, and it's not an accident that professional gamers come from these countries the most, right, around the world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But when it comes to development of the industry, pretty much USA and Japan dominate. They dominate these things, because they're the two big. But however, there are studios all around the world that also contribute as well. Probably the most well-known one is a Polish developer called CD Projekt Red. So they created the Witcher series. Well, it was based on a book, but they created the video gaming series that became a hit, and now Netflix has sort of taken it up and created a season out of it. And they're highly respected. They're highly, highly respected. But they started off as a little, Polish developer that has now gone global. Right. But I suppose the biggest problematic area in gaming today, and perhaps seen as a problematic area, I suppose, by the world, is China.
Really? Why?
Yeah, China. Well, there was an incident last year. It was called the Blizzard incident. Blizzard is a gaming company that created a very popular series called World of Warcraft and Diablo and these sort of games. And it was a problem because, you remember last year, still today, I suppose, it affects the Hong Kong riots.
Yes,
you remember those around the world, right? Fight for democracy kind of thing, right? Well, China has a very authoritarian way of doing business. And I can understand from their point of view that they need to control that because they have 1.4 billion people, unlike everybody else around the world. Well, what happened is that during an esports tournament, I think it was StarCraft or something, basically one of the top players had won the competition, and the prize money was quite large. It was in the 6 figures, right?
Wow.
And it was US dollars, right? And he came up. His winning speech was "Stand up for Hong Kong," right? And then immediately, Chinese government put pressure on Blizzard to drop him. So he didn't receive his prize money. He was stripped of his title, right?
Wow.
And for doing that. Now, you have to understand something. Blizzard is an American company, right? It belongs to liberal democracies.
Okay, yeah,
right?
You're right.
Right, liberal democracies, right?
I see.
It's freedom of speech. We respect freedom of speech. But because in China, if you want to do business, you have to adhere to all of their authoritarian demands. And one of those demands is you do not speak ill of the government or go against it in any shape or form whatsoever. You'll be dropped as a business, right? So we started thinking about, so the gamers around the world started thinking, is it wise to do business with these guys? Right? Is it wise for the companies from our nations to go into these countries and then start changing their tune on certain issues, right? Because they need to do business in this huge market called China. So they would sell out, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. Profit over principles, right? So it's began to really question us on our morality and ethics, right? Yeah. And then, but I see it also from the Chinese point of view, right? Is that in China it is unacceptable for guests to insult the host. And as far as the China is concerned, any company that comes into China to do business is a guest.
Yes.
Right? So you must adhere to strict rules, and if you go out of them, if you deviate, we don't do business with you. Right.
So
so I understand their point of view, but at the same time, it goes against our principles.
Okay. Right? Yes, now I understand. So in this case, what's the future of this video gaming culture? So
I think it's going to go VR, virtual reality. You know, those things that you wear on your heads and you can see things in 3D and experience it. I think that is going to be the next great interactivity. It allows interactivity in ways that other ways just can't do. Right. And I just think that in the quarantine world, combined with the power of video gaming, it's going to create a VR sort of revolution. Next wave will be a big one. Because imagine we're teaching classes online in front of a screen. Imagine now you can do conferencing and meetings and teachings 3D, almost mimicking real life situations, real life meetings and stuff.
Right.
Perhaps we don't need to travel to school anymore. Right, and that's a great convenience. We found out through this quarantine that being stuck at home doing things online can be a boon.
That's true. Yeah,
it can be a great boon here. So, I think that the power of gaming, the way that that unstoppable force drives technology, combined with our need to stay at home, will bring something. Bring something, some sort of new technological, revolution in our daily lives. And I think that's a very, very likely scenario. Yeah. All right. Well, we talked a lot about video games today.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Mike, because a lot of information was new for me.
Oh, and you're welcome. Yeah. Okay. Guys, this was the Big Apple School podcast. This is Mike.
And this is Vladimir.
Signing off.